Royal birthdays follow a gentle script. A new photograph is released. The palace posts its warm words, and the family gathers for cake somewhere private. On August 15th, Princess Anne turns 76. And if her past birthdays are any guide, she will treat the day like any other as a working day. That alone sets her apart. But inside the family, something else sets her apart even more. Aides are said to brief her differently. Organizers prepare for her visits differently. Even her brother, the king, is said to weigh her advice differently from anyone else's. Across more than 50 years of public life, and has become the one member of the family nobody wants to argue with. Not the most famous, not the most photographed, simply the one nobody crosses. And how she earned that is a far better story than any birthday portrait. Most people only ever heard pieces of it. This is not just a birthday. It is a question hanging over the whole institution. Who actually holds the working monarchy together? The crown has shrunk. The king has been managing illness. The whales have young children and careful schedules. And year after year, when the annual engagement tables are counted, the name at or near the top is not the one on the coins. It is hers, as she turns 76, and is not the monarchy's ornament. By the numbers, she is its engine. How that happened is a story the palace never tells in full. It runs from a night in 1970 for that the family still rarely discusses through a decision that broke royal convention to the reason his sister now shoulders more of the king's reign than the palace ever spells out. And was born on August 15th, 1950, second child of a future queen, and she has spent her whole life declining to behave like a decoration. At the 1976 Montreal Olympics, she rode for Britain in three-day eventing, the first member of the royal family ever to compete at a games. She fell hard on the cross-country course, was concussed, and finished the competition. Anyway, there is a detail from those games that says even more. Officials reportedly excused her alone among the female athletes from the standard gender verification test on the grounds that everyone knew exactly who she was. The habits never changed. For more than 50 years, she has been president of Save the Children, one of a portfolio of roughly 300 organizations she works for, most of which never see a camera. The annual tally of royal engagements counted from the court's circular and traditionally published in the Times shows the same pattern year after year. Hundreds of engagements and an at or near the top of the table ahead of royals 20 and 30 years younger. The public sees a brisk woman in sensible clothes. The family sees something else. The person who simply does not stop. But the reputation that really surrounds her, the one that makes people careful in her presence, was not built by work alone. It was built on the evening of March 20th, 1974 on the Mall a few hundred yards from Buckingham Palace, and was 23, newly married, being driven back to the palace with her husband when a white car swerved in front of theirs and forced it to stop. A man named Ian Ball got out holding two pistols. What happened next is not tabloid legend. It is court record. Ball shot Anne's bodyguard, Inspector James Beaton, then her chauffeur, then a journalist who tried to intervene, then a police constable. For men, for shootings, one by one, while Anne sat in the back seat of the car. Then B reached the door and told the princess to come with him. He had a ransom demand prepared. Anne, 23 years old, with her bodyguard bleeding beside the car, looked at the armed man and refused, in words that later went around the world. Not bloody likely. There was a tug-off war across the back seat, the kidnapper pulling her one way, her husband holding her back while she talked and stalled. Among the passers-by who ran toward the gunfire rather than away from it was a former boxer named Ron Russell who punched Ball and shielded the princess. He was decorated for it. When Ball was finally distracted and was out of the opposite door in seconds, he was tackled moments later. All four wounded men survived, and Beaton received the George Cross, the country's highest civilian award for gallantry. Ian Bull pleaded guilty and has spent the decades since in secure detention, and gave her statements and carried on with her diary. And in later interviews, she described the whole episode with a dryness that became part of her legend. The palace learned something that evening that it has never forgotten. But the decision that defined her even more came 3 years later, and this time it meant declining something the Queen herself was willing to give. When Anne's first child, Peter, was born in 1977, protocol offered what every royal parent before her had accepted, a title. The Queen is understood to have been willing to grant one, and her husband declined. They declined again for Zara in 1981. Her children would be the Queen's first grandchildren with no prince, no princess, no courtesy title at all, just names. At the time, inside a family built entirely on rank, it read as almost unthinkable, and never wavered. And years later, she put her reasoning on the record with typical bluntness, saying she thought it was probably the right thing to do. Zara has said in interviews that she is grateful for it. 2 generations later, much of the family has moved toward the model and chose first. And if anyone thought age would soften the pattern, Princess and is in hospital with concussion tonight after apparently being injured by a horse while walking on her estate in Gloucester yesterday, the summer of 2024, answered that and then 73 was injured on her estate at Buckingham Park in an incident involving horses, suffered a concussion, and spent 5 nights in hospital. In a statement, Buckingham Palace said, "The Princess Royal has sustained minor injuries and concussion following an incident on the Buckingham Park estate yesterday evening. The King has been kept closely informed and joined the whole royal family in sending his fondest love and well wishes to the princess for a speedy recovery." The word from her own team afterwards was that she remembered little of it. Within weeks, she was back in public, working through engagements at the same pace as before, joking that doctors and family had ordered her to slow down and that it was so far not going well. Which brings the story to the part the public rarely sees: what and has become inside her brother's reign. When Charles was diagnosed with cancer in early 2024, the monarchy's workload did not pause and much of its visible weight settled on the shoulders of the sister. The press long ago named the family's hardest worker. Royal author Robert Jobson has argued in his books and interviews that Charles listens to, and in a way he listens to almost no one else. The sister who wants nothing from him. She holds no rival court. She gives no confessional interviews. She is one of the few people on earth who has known the king his entire life and owes him nothing. At the coronation in 2023, the picture said it better than any briefing. And in uniform on horseback, riding directly behind the new king's coach as gold stick in waiting the sovereign's personal protection role, dating back centuries, the woman who once fought off a kidnapper on the Mall was now at 72 literally guarding the king's back on the most watched day of his reign. The arrangement by all appearances suits them both. He gets the one advisor who cannot be flattered. She gets what she has always preferred: responsibility without spotlight, and twice in 2 years. The country saw what that role costs. When her father died in 2021, Anne's public tribute was brief and entirely unvarnished, built around the plainest sentence anyone in the family produced that week. "You know what is going to happen," she said, "but you are never really ready." Then in September 2022, when the Queen died at Balmoral, it was Anne who traveled with her mother's coffin on every mile of the long journey south through the Scottish towns into Edinburgh and on the flight to London, the only one of the 4 children at the coffin side throughout. Afterwards, she released a statement of a kind she almost never gives, saying she had been fortunate to share the last 24 hours of her mother's life and calling it an honor and a privilege to accompany her on her final journeys. It said more than most memoirs. Then she went back to work because in her world that is what the job is. So the 76th birthday will come and go without much ceremony, which is exactly how she wants it. Asked over the years about slowing down, and has made her position clear enough. Retirement, in her view, is not really how service works. The monarchy around her keeps changing shape. Reigns end, titles move, generations rise. Anne's role has barely changed since the 1970s. And that is precisely why it matters more now than ever. Whenever the institution has needed someone to simply show up without drama and without excuses, it has reached for the same person for half a century. There is no obvious successor to that role because it was never a role at all. It is a temperament, and it does not appear to be hereditary. The horse trials she founded at Buckingham bear her stamp on her own land. The 300 organizations still get their visits. The diary for the year ahead is by every published account already filling because nobody has ever heard Princess and suggests there might be another way to do this job. Wherever August 15th finds her, the day will look like every other working day of the past 50 years. Horses in the morning, a full diary, no fuss